The first thing I heard wasn't a bark, not really. It was a thin, desperate whimper, strangled by something wet and crumpled. I froze in the dim glow of the streetlight, the city's hum pressing against my ears, a sharp contrast to the tiny, shivering sound. At the edge of the cracked asphalt, tangled in a heap of greasy plastic bags and broken cardboard, a small shape quivered. My chest tightened as I crouched closer, and that's when I saw it, a German shepherd puppy, its eyes wide and impossibly scared, staring at me as if I were both a savior and a threat. Nestled beside it was a crumpled piece of paper, damp at the corners, clutched by tiny, trembling paws. I couldn't read it yet. I could barely breathe. The stench of garbage, the metallic tang of rain-soaked asphalt, the distant wail of a siren, all mixed into a single, suffocating knot of reality. I reached out slowly, and the puppy flinched, but didn't run. Its tiny body was a trembling question, its note a mystery I had to unravel. In that moment everything else, the traffic, the drizzle, the noise, vanished. There was only the puppy, the bag and the story I hadn't even begun to understand. The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless drizzle that turned the cracked asphalt into a mirror of trembling streetlights. I was halfway home, shoulders hunched against the chill, when I heard it. A faint, desperate whimper that cut through the hum of the city. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling loose garbage cans, a stray cat perhaps, but then it came again, sharper, more plaintive, like a tiny soul crying for help. I followed the sound, heart hammering, and that's when I saw it. A small heap in the shadows, tucked into a soiled, damp trash bag, its tiny body shivering against the cold night. The puppy's eyes were wide, glossy orbs that seemed too big for its fragile frame, reflecting the weak yellow glow of the streetlight. Its coat was matted, streaked with mud and grime, and its legs trembled so violently it looked as though it might collapse under its own weight. I knelt slowly, careful not to frighten it further, and the whimpers grew louder, more urgent, almost like a warning, "Help me, but be gentle." My hands hovered for a long moment before I dared touch it, and the little body quaked beneath my fingers, a delicate tremor that spoke of fear, starvation, and abandonment. There was a crumpled piece of paper, tucked inside the folds of the bag, damp and soft, sticking to the puppy's tiny paw. I could barely read it, the ink running with the rain, but even at first glance, I sensed it held a story more painful than anything I had known. Why was this little life left here, alone, in the dark? Every instinct in me screamed to pick it up, to hold it close, to shield it from the cold, yet I hesitated, afraid I might do the wrong thing. But then the puppy's gaze locked onto mine, and in that fragile moment, trust began to form, silent and fragile as spider silk. The rain-soaked streets smelled of wet asphalt and rotting leaves, a pungent reminder of the world's indifference. And yet here, beneath the cold drizzle, there was a pulse of life that refused to give up. The puppy trembled, teeth chattering, paws tucked beneath its tiny body, yet it didn't move away. I wrapped it carefully in my jacket, feeling its heart beating erratically against my chest. Its warmth seeped into me in a way I wasn't prepared for. A tiny flicker of life so raw and urgent it made the world around us fade into obscurity. In that single heartbeat, I realized I had become responsible for this fragile creature, and the gravity of it sank deep into my bones. We made our way home slowly, the puppy tucked against me. Every sound, the distant wail of a siren, the splash of tires through puddles, the whistle of wind through telephone lines, magnified in its fearful ears. Its small body shifted nervously with each step, head trembling, ears pinned back. I whispered soft reassurances, though I doubted it understood, but my voice seemed to reach it in some primitive way. It's strange how a tiny life can demand everything from you: attention, patience, compassion, and in return, offer only trust in its rawest, most unpolished form. Once home, I set it gently on a blanket on the living room floor. It sniffed, tiny nose twitching, ears flicking, before curling into itself, trying to make a space that felt safe, though the room was foreign and overwhelming. I prepared a shallow dish of lukewarm water and softened kibble, watching as it hesitated, pawing the food nervously, eyes darting to mine for permission. When it finally took a tentative bite, it was almost reverent, as though every morsel was a small miracle. I knelt beside it, feeling the weight of the night's discoveries pressing down, the wet clothes, the cold seeping into my bones, and yet somehow the puppy's fragile presence made everything else, my fatigue, the damp, the shadows outside, irrelevant. That crumpled note still haunted me. Carefully, I pried it free from the wet folds of the trash bag. The paper was soft, torn, and smudged, but a few words were legible. I couldn't care for him, please love him. And then a name, scrawled in shaky handwriting. I read it again and again, each time feeling a pang of sorrow, a knot tightening in my chest. Someone had loved this puppy enough to want him safe, yet not enough to keep him. That contradiction, the blend of despair and hope, mirrored the trembling pup at my feet. Its trust had to be earned, slowly, patiently, and it was a responsibility I couldn't shirk. Hours passed. The puppy explored cautiously, tentatively sniffing corners of the room, paws slippery on the hardwood. Every so often it would curl into my lap, shaking violently, and I would cradle it, whispering promises I hoped I could keep. Sleep came fitfully for both of us. I could hear its small, irregular breathing, interrupted by whimpers and the occasional shiver. I wanted to imagine it dreaming of something better, a warm home, soft sunlight, hands that would never let go. And in the silence of that room, with the rain still tapping the windows, I realized that the night had already changed us both irrevocably. By morning, sunlight seeped through the blinds, illuminating the tiny figure still curled in the blanket. Its fur glistened where the water had dampened it, eyes blinking slowly, trusting enough now to stay near, yet still wary, haunted by a world it barely understood. I knelt beside it, letting my hand rest lightly on its trembling back, and in that quiet, I made a silent vow. Whatever it took, however long, I would be there. I would learn its language, its fears, its joys, and together, we would navigate the long road from abandonment to belonging. And even as I held it, feeling the faint tremors beneath my palm, I knew the note was more than just a plea. It was a reminder that this little life, fragile and trembling, had survived the worst night of its life. And now, maybe, just maybe, it had a chance at the dawn. Morning light spilled through the blinds, thin ribbons of gold that seemed to cautiously touch the little body curled in the blanket. The puppy's breathing was slower now, more rhythmic, though every so often a shiver ran through its tiny frame as if it still carried the night's terror inside. I sat cross-legged on the floor beside it, watching, waiting, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like a stone in my chest. It was so small, so impossibly delicate, and yet in its vulnerability there was a kind of stubborn will, the faint insistence that life, even after the worst, must go on. The first tentative steps came mid-morning, paws pressing against the soft rug as if testing gravity, testing safety. The puppy paused, ears flicking at every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of floorboards, the flutter of curtains in the gentle breeze. I held my breath, letting it discover the room on its own terms, only reaching out when it wobbled dangerously, guiding it back gently, silently teaching it that this place, this human, could be trusted. Each interaction was a delicate negotiation, a sniff, a step forward, a hesitant wag of the tail that faltered as quickly as it came. And with each falter, I felt my heart tighten, each little victory a fragile spark against the shadow of its fear. I named it Kai. The name came softly, almost as if I had whispered it to the universe, and it had returned as permission. Kai tilted its head, ears pricking, as if trying the sound in its own mind, deciding whether it belonged, whether it was safe to respond. When I offered my hand, palm open and steady, it hesitated for a heartbeat that felt like hours, then nudged it lightly with its tiny nose. The touch was electric, a small miracle of trust forming in the quiet between us. For the first time since the night it had been abandoned, I could see the faint beginnings of hope flicker in its gaze. Feeding Kai became a ritual of patience. Every morsel of softened kibble was a test of courage, every sip of water a tiny triumph. I spoke softly as I guided it, a constant murmur that wrapped around its fear. The puppy's trembling eased only gradually, and there were moments when its tiny body tensed so sharply it startled me, a visceral echo of trauma that no warmth or reassurance could entirely erase. I learned to read its subtle signals, the flick of a paw, the tilt of the ears, the way it pressed itself low to the floor when startled. Each day a layer of fear melted into curiosity, and each small step forward felt like a triumph, both ours and its own. Afternoons were spent exploring the apartment together, the puppy tentatively investigating corners, rugs, and shadows, always glancing back to make sure I followed. I watched as it discovered textures beneath its paws, the soft carpet, the cold hardwood, the smooth tile in the kitchen, and marveled at how the smallest sensations could overwhelm yet delight. Every interaction, nosing at a slipper, pawing at a discarded paper towel, was a negotiation with the world, a reminder that its trust was earned, not taken. And in these small, mundane moments, a bond deepened. forged in patience, tenderness, and unwavering presence. At night I held Kai close as it slept, its tiny body curled into mine like a fragile flame protected from the wind. The sound of its breathing, irregular but steadying, became a rhythm that grounded me, a reminder that life, even in its most fragile form, carried resilience. Sometimes it whimpered in its sleep, paws twitching as if chasing a nightmare I couldn't see. I would stroke its soft fur, whisper promises of safety, and hold it a little tighter, silently vowing to shield it from a world that had once been cruel. And in those moments I understood how trust, once broken, must be rebuilt one gentle touch at a time. The note from the trash bag lingered in my mind. Its edges were still damp, the ink smeared, but the words carried weight. A human plea, a confession of inability, a hope that someone else might offer the love it could not. I read it again as Kai slept, tracing the words with trembling fingers, and realized that the story of abandonment was only one side of this life. The other side, the side we were now building, was a narrative of first breaths of trust, of tentative curiosity, and of a fragile hope that could, in time, become a flame strong enough to banish the shadows of fear. By the end of the week, Kai's curiosity grew bolder. It began following me from room to room, a wobbly shadow learning the rhythm of a safe life. Each interaction, no matter how small, was a negotiation with trauma, a sniff, a wag, a hesitant leap toward my outstretched hand. And each small triumph was electric, a reminder that even the tiniest life carries within it a resilience that can outlast despair. I marveled at how quickly this creature, once shivering and silent in a wet trash bag, began to reclaim pieces of joy, even amid the lingering fear. And yet every night, when Kai nestled against me, ears flicking at distant sounds, paws tucked beneath its chest, I knew the journey had only just begun. Trust, once lost, could never be taken for granted. Every step forward, every tentative approach, every glance toward me was a quiet miracle. And I learned in those long hours beside a trembling puppy that the smallest life could teach the deepest lessons about patience, empathy, and love, the kind that required nothing in return but presence, and yet gave everything in the world back. As I watched Kai sleep that first Sunday morning, the sunlight spilling over its wet, slowly drying fur, I realized the transformation had begun. Not just in the puppy, fragile and cautious, but in myself, learning the rhythms of patience, the depth of silent trust, and the beauty of being chosen even by the smallest of lives. And in that quiet, golden moment, I understood that the first breaths of trust, fragile as they were, could change everything. Kai had begun to settle, though the echoes of the night it had survived clung to it like a second skin. Even as sunlight streamed through the windows, warming its fur and illuminating its soft, curious eyes, there were moments when the past pressed against the present with a weight that no comfort could entirely erase. A sudden noise, a slammed door, a dropped dish, the shrill call of a neighbor, could send its tiny body into a shiver so deep it seemed to echo through its bones. And yet, there was a growing defiance beneath the tremble, a quiet insistence that the world, while once cruel, could also be safe, could also hold warmth. I watched Kai closely, noticing the subtle shadows in its behavior. It flinched when hands moved too quickly, avoided certain corners of the apartment where shadows pooled, and sometimes froze mid-step as though listening for something I couldn't hear. I tried to imagine the nights it had spent alone, wrapped in plastic and cardboard, exposed to rain and cold and the indifference of passers-by. Its eyes carried fragments of those memories, tiny shards of fear that shimmered in the corner of its gaze, always waiting for the familiar to falter. Each day, I realized, would be a delicate negotiation, not just of trust, but of memory, teaching Kai that the world could be different without erasing what it had survived. One evening, as the sun dipped behind gray clouds and spilled a soft, melancholy light across the room, Kai approached the note from the trash bag again. I had left it on the coffee table, hoping to decipher more of the message. Its paws hovered over the damp paper, nose twitching, ears pricked as though sensing the importance I could not articulate. There was a pause, a tiny tilt of the head, before it sniffed, nudged, and backed away. It was a gesture both tentative and profound, a recognition that the past, though shadowed, was part of its story. I knelt beside it, placing a hand on its trembling back, and whispered, "We'll understand it together." That night, Kai refused to sleep in the blanket as before. Instead, it paced the room, circling, sniffing, occasionally pausing to press its forehead against the cold hardwood floor. Its tiny whimpers rose and fell like a slow, haunting melody, and I stayed beside it, offering gentle murmurs, soft strokes along its spine, and the warmth of presence. Memories, I realized, were living things for Kai. They demanded attention, acknowledgement, and patience. To soothe the shivers, to coax the tremors into stillness, required a rhythm that mirrored breathing, heartbeat, and the quiet hum of empathy. A sudden rainstorm began outside, the heavy drumming against the windows startling Kai into a series of tiny, frantic hops. I held it close, wrapping it in a towel, letting the scent of home, the faint trace of lavender from cleaning spray, the earthy tang of wet wood, anchor it. In the storm, its tiny claws dug into my arm, its body shaking violently, and I murmured, "It's okay, Kai. I'm here." Every shiver, every quiver was a whisper from the past, a story of survival, and I could feel the weight of its history pressing into my own chest. Protecting it, I realized, wasn't just about food and warmth. It was about honoring everything it had endured, every night of loneliness and fear. Over the next days, shadows of its past showed in more subtle ways. Certain streets on our short walks made it hesitate, ears pressed flat, body crouched low. The sound of plastic bags rustling near the market sent it scuttling behind my legs. Yet, every small victory, a sniff, a step forward, a tail wag, felt monumental. Kai was learning, slowly, that the world could be kind, that my presence could be a shield. And in its cautious curiosity, I began to see the glimmer of resilience that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of fear and trembling. The note continued to haunt me. Each line was fragmented, a puzzle of human emotion and absence, regret, fear, hope, and surrender woven together in shaky handwriting. I began to read aloud some of the words to Kai, not knowing if it understood language, but believing the cadence, the tone, might soothe. "I couldn't care for you. I hoped someone would love you, forgive me." Kai listened in its own way, ears twitching, eyes blinking slowly, leaning slightly closer with each whispered phrase. Perhaps it recognized sorrow, perhaps it felt the honesty of the voice. And in that quiet intimacy, we shared a moment of acknowledgement. The past had happened, but it did not have to define the future. One afternoon, Kai finally ventured into the corner where a pile of discarded cardboard once frightened it. It sniffed cautiously, circled once, and then pressed its head against the corner as if claiming it, not as a source of fear but as a place it could own. My breath caught. It was a small act, almost imperceptible, yet monumental. Shadowed memory met present courage, and for a heartbeat, I felt as if the universe itself had exhaled. That was the essence of Kai's journey, the gentle reclamation of self, step by trembling step, in a world that had once offered nothing but indifference. Night fell again, and I watched it curl in the middle of the rug, body relaxed for the first time, ears flicking only occasionally at distant sounds. Its chest rose and fell in a rhythm that felt steady, almost confident, and I felt tears prick my own eyes. The past had not disappeared, it never would, but Kai was learning that trust could exist alongside memory, that warmth could coexist with loss. Each shiver left behind in the night was replaced by a breath, a beat, a quiet insistence on life. As I sat beside it, tracing gentle patterns in its soft fur, I understood that healing was not linear, nor was it swift. It was the small, incremental victories, the hesitant sniff of a new corner, the first wag of a tail in the morning, the softest nudge against my hand. These were the moments that mattered. And Kai, with all its fragile courage and trembling determination, was teaching me as much as I was teaching it, about patience, presence, and the quiet power of choosing to stay, to love, and to trust again. In the deep stillness of the night, when the storm outside had passed and only the soft hum of the city remained, Kai shifted closer to me, resting its head against my chest. Its eyes, half closed, reflected a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of hope that the shadows would not always control the story. And as I held it, breathing in the soft scent of damp fur and new beginnings, I realized that the journey through fear, though painful, was also where the first seeds of courage took root. Kai had begun to reclaim itself, not as a fragile creature abandoned, but as a living testament to the quiet, unwavering strength of survival. The morning air was crisped, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and the distant hum of the city waking. Kai padded cautiously along the edge of the sidewalk, paws slipping slightly on the damp pavement, ears flicking at every passing sound. Today was different. There was a tension in the air, a whisper of something unknown that made its small body tense and tail curl low. I could feel it, the subtle shift in its breathing, the way its tiny muscles coiled in readiness. Whatever lay ahead, Kai seemed to know. It was a challenge, a boundary to test the fragile trust it had begun to place in me. Our walk took us to the park, a sprawling field of dewy grass where Kai had never ventured before. It froze at the edge, nose twitching as unfamiliar scents hit it. Damp leaves, other dogs, humans speaking in hurried tones, the faint tang of discarded food. Its body pressed low, ears flattened, eyes wide as it evaluated the space. I knelt beside it, voice soft and steady, coaxing without pressure. "It's okay, Kai. We'll take it slow." Tiny paw steps followed, hesitant, each one a silent negotiation with fear. I felt my own pulse echo its tremors, a shared rhythm of caution and courage. The park held both danger and possibility. A group of dogs played nearby, barking and tumbling, their energy overwhelming in a way that made Kai flinch and retreat to my side. Its paws scraped against the wet grass, eyes darting between the other animals and my hand. I knelt low, letting it press against me, heart pounding with the intensity of the moment. I whispered encouragements, but it was clear that the external world, the chaotic, unpredictable world it had once known, was pressing against the delicate bubble of trust we had built at home. Suddenly, a sharp shout rang out from the other side of the park. Children running, a ball bouncing, laughter cutting through the quiet morning. Kai froze, ears quivering, tail tucked, every instinct screaming danger. I reached down slowly, hand hovering near its head, and waited. Its trembling intensified, and I felt the raw pulse of memory. The night spent abandoned, the whimpers unanswered in the dark, the cold rain pressing against a tiny body with nothing to protect it. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, it leaned into my hand, seeking reassurance. That tiny choice, so small to the world, was monumental for Kai. It was a leap into the unknown, guided by trust forged in the quiet of an apartment far from this chaos. As we ventured further, Kai began to explore more boldly, sniffing at fallen leaves, pawing gently at puddles, and occasionally glancing back to ensure I was near. Every new sensation, cool grass underfoot, the smell of mud and grass mixed with city air, was a test of courage, a negotiation with instinct. And every time it took a tentative step forward, I felt a swell of emotion, a recognition that the small creature before me was rewriting its own story, moment by trembling moment. A sudden gust of wind swept through the park, rustling trees and scattering loose papers across the path. Kai jumped, eyes wide, body low to the ground, trembling violently for a heartbeat before regaining its balance. I crouched beside it, murmuring soothing words, tracing gentle circles on its back. Each touch was a silent promise I would not let harm come, I would not abandon, I would stay. Slowly, the shivering eased, replaced by cautious curiosity. It sniffed a drifting leaf, pawed at it, then glanced back at me with a look that seemed to ask, "Is it really safe?" The answer, simple and human, came in the warmth of my hand and the steady rhythm of my voice. The note from the trash bag, which had haunted our quiet nights, seemed almost alive in that moment. Its plea for care, its confessions of fear and hope, echoed in every tiny gesture Kai made, the trembling pause at unfamiliar ground, the tentative sniff of new scents, the slow wag of a tail learning to trust again. Today, the park was more than a field of grass, it was a stage for courage, a landscape where the boundaries between past trauma and present trust collided, and Kai had to navigate the tension with every small movement. We sat under a tree for a brief rest, the damp air clinging to fur and clothes alike. Kai leaned against my leg, ears flicking at distant sounds, nose twitching as it absorbed the panorama of life beyond the apartment. Its chest rose and fell, shivers now mostly gaunt, replaced by a tense alertness that hinted at the fragile confidence growing within. Every moment of hesitation, every tiny victory over instinctive fear, was a statement. The world could be faced, slowly, carefully, and survival could mean more than merely enduring. It could mean daring to step forward, even when every instinct screamed to retreat. On the way home, Kai navigated puddles with cautious curiosity, pausing to investigate the reflections in the water. The way its paws disturbed the mirrored surface. Each ripple seemed to echo the tiny shifts within its own heart, the subtle growth of courage, and the faint embers of joy. At one point, a stray leaf landed on its nose, and for the first time it didn't flinch violently. Instead, it sniffed, pawed gently, and then glanced up at me with a small, almost imperceptible wag of the tail. That single gesture, so fleeting yet monumental, felt like the culmination of nights spent cradled in blankets, coaxed with soft words, and nurtured through patience and presence. By the time we returned to the apartment, Kai's tiny body was wet with dew, fur matted but gleaming with the sheen of adventure, and eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. I knelt, letting it curl against me, feeling the rapid pulse beneath its ribs, and I realized that this day, the first true confrontation with the outside world, was a leap into unknown territory that Kai had not only survived but begun to master. Its trust had been tested, its courage stretched, and in the trembling paw steps forward, I witnessed the beginning of a new chapter. A story where fear was acknowledged but no longer absolute, where vulnerability and bravery could coexist, and where the smallest life could remind me of the quiet, staggering strength of the will to survive. As evening settled, painting the sky in muted purples and deepening blues, Kai nestled against my chest, eyes half closed, ears relaxed for the first time in days. The world outside, with all its chaos, had been faced and navigated, and though shadows of fear lingered, they were no longer chains. They were reminders of how far the tiny heart had come. And in the hush of that twilight moment, I understood something profound. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to move forward anyway, even with trembling paws, and Kai had already begun to teach me that lesson with every heartbeat, every shiver, every tentative sniff of the unknown. Morning light filtered through the window in soft, golden shafts, illuminating the small figure curled in the blanket. Kai stirred, tiny paws stretching, nose twitching at the warmth that had finally replaced the chill of the night. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. The trembling had eased, replaced by a cautious confidence that had begun to shine through its still, vulnerable body. I watched as it rose, ears flicking, tail lifting slightly, tentative yet unmistakably present in the world. This was a life that had endured, a tiny heart that had refused to give in to despair, and now it began to embrace possibility. Breakfast was a quiet ceremony. Kai approached the food slowly, sniffing the plate before daring to take a bite. Each mouthful was deliberate, a small affirmation of trust in me and in the life I was offering. Its tail twitched occasionally, almost imperceptibly, and I felt a swell of relief and pride. Even the simplest acts, eating, drinking, stepping across the floor, had become milestones, evidence of resilience after nights spent abandoned and shivering in a trash bag. Every victory was a reminder that the smallest life could carry immense strength. We ventured outside once again, into a park, now bathed in the gentle warmth of early sunlight. The grass glistened with dew, sparkling like 1,000 tiny gems, and the air smelled of wet earth and growing things. Kai moved confidently, sniffing at the ground, ears erect, tail wagging in hesitant but unmistakable joy. There were still cautious pauses, moments where its gaze flicked anxiously to the unknown, but each time it took a step forward. It carried the unmistakable mark of courage earned through patience and love. The park, once a landscape of fear, had become a field of discovery, a place where shadows were no longer threats but opportunities to reclaim life. Children played nearby, laughter ringing across the lawn, and for the first time, Kai did not retreat. It crouched low, observing, nostrils flaring, then, almost imperceptibly, inched closer to the action. Each movement was careful, deliberate, a negotiation with instinct. And when a bouncing ball rolled too close, Kai sniffed it curiously, pawed it lightly, then trotted back to me with an almost imperceptible wag of its tail. That single act, engagement without fear, felt monumental. A culmination of weeks spent coaxing trust from trembling paws. It was proof that resilience, nurtured with patience, could blossom even in hearts that had once been broken. Back at home, the note from the trash bag lay on the table, the faint smudges of ink now a testament to survival rather than despair. I picked it up, smoothing the damp paper, and read the words aloud, imagining Kai listening, understanding in its own way. I couldn't care for you, please love him. Its eyes flicked toward me as I spoke, ears pricking, and it nudged my hand with its nose, a silent affirmation that the promise of care had been fulfilled. The note, once a symbol of abandonment, had transformed into a marker of redemption, a story completed not by the human who left it but by the tiny heart that had survived. Afternoon sun streamed through the window as Kai explored the apartment with growing confidence. Rugs became familiar terrain. Corners no longer sources of fear but areas to investigate, and even the shadows on the floor seemed less threatening. Every sniff, every pawing motion, every gentle nudge against my leg was a testament to healing, a signal that the lessons of trust, patience, and care had taken root. I marveled at how quickly a fragile life could recover when met with steady, unwavering presence. The small body that had once trembled at every sound now moved with cautious curiosity, embracing a world that had once been hostile and transforming it into a home. Evening fell, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold, and Kai settled beside me, fur warm and drying from the day's exploration. Its breathing was slow, steady, confident, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no trembling, no hesitation. Its eyes blinked slowly, reflecting trust fully given, and tail swished lazily against the floor in contentment. The city outside remained indifferent, the distant sirens and passing cars a backdrop to this intimate world we had built together. A world of safety, warmth, and quiet joy. I stroked Kai's fur gently, noticing the softness that had once been matted with grime, the eyes that had once been wide with fear now shining with intelligence and curiosity. The note, the night in the trash bag, the shivers and whimpers. All of it had led to this moment, a tiny heart, resilient and thriving, experiencing the warmth of sunlight for the first time in memory. And as I traced my hand along its back, I realized that this was more than survival. It was life reclaimed, trust rebuilt, and love in its purest form, freely given and returned. Night fell with a quiet serenity. Kai curled into the blanket near my feet, occasionally nudging closer, ears flicking at distant sounds but body relaxed, chest rising and falling with calm, rhythmic certainty. The journey from trembling abandonment to confident curiosity had been gradual, painstaking, and deeply rewarding. And in the hush of that room, with the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows that no longer frightened, I understood the truth that Kai had been teaching me all along. Even the smallest life, when nurtured, could endure, thrive, and transform the world around it simply by existing, by trusting, by daring to step into the sunlight. As I watched it drift into sleep, I thought of the crumpled note once clutched in a tiny paw, of the despair that had left it alone on a rain-soaked street, and I smiled softly. Kai had rewritten the ending of that story, not through words or promises but through life, resilience, and quiet courage. Its small body, warm and safe, its eyes finally free from constant fear, carried the echo of a journey completed, and in the final golden rays of evening, the sunlight resting on wet fur and soft blankets, I felt a profound stillness, the kind that comes when a story of abandonment, despair, and fear transforms into one of trust, joy, and belonging. Kai lifted its head slightly, nose twitching, ears alert even in sleep, and I knew it had absorbed everything: the lessons of patience, the depth of gentle care, and the power of survival against all odds. And as I whispered softly, stroking its fur for the last time that night, I understood the quiet miracle we had both witnessed, that even the tiniest, most fragile life could step from shadows into sunlight, carrying within it the promise that no night was too dark, no fear too great, and no heart too small to learn how to trust again.